Guys, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel to burn it down with Kim Brown, and follow us places around the internet at BIDWKB. This next story comes out of California. And guys, we all know that the prison system, the American prison system, is basically slavery. I was going to say that some vestiges of slavery. No, it's actually still very much slavery, as we all know from the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, which did grant enslaved people freedom, unless you get locked up and then you ain't got no more freedom and you back in slavery, right? So one of the features of slavery was also sexual violence committed against men and women. But let's stick here with women. And let's be clear, sexual violence against incarcerated people has never stopped, but it has absolutely always been a marker of what goes on inside women's prisons. And sometimes in the men's prison, the sexual violence can be inmate versus inmate. But in women's prisons, overwhelmingly, the sexual violence is committed by the correctional officers there tasked to ensure the safety and structure of the prison. But when it's the workers at the prison, the ones committing the sexual violence, oh, Houston, we have a huge problem. And in fact, in California, at Dublin Women's Prison, FCI Dublin, Federal Correctional Institute Dublin, out there in NorCal, right? If I got this right, Cali folks, outside of Oakland, California, the Women's Dublin Federal Prison is slated to close. The Bureau of Prisons, because again, this federal prison, so this is operated by the federal government. The Bureau of Prisons, which oversees federal prisons across the country, announced that the Dublin Women's Prison is going to close. Well, why? Why is it closing? Well, per a 2021 Associated Press investigative piece, which revealed that there was systemic levels of sexual abuse and violence committed by correctional officers against the incarcerated women there at the Dublin prison. And in fact, eight former and current employees, or maybe former employees by this point, 8 employees of the prison have been brought up on charges. 2 have already been convicted. 1, I think, is still awaiting. 2 of the people that have been convicted in some sort of abuse of these women inmates was the warden and the chaplain, to give you some idea of how pervasive and widespread this sexual abuse of these women was. So, Will, actually, I want us to start off. Let's go ahead and get into the ABC 7 piece. So this is ABC 7 coming out of the Bay Area. It gives a pretty decent, if not abbreviated, overview of the kind of conditions that these women were facing. And to be clear, everybody, this is one women's prison. Assume that this is happening, what you're about to hear, this kind of behavior is happening at all women's prisons. Okay. So anyway, let's take it up with ABC 7, giving us the details about why FCI Dublin, the prison, women's prison, federal prison, is about to shut down.
This course of action is to close the facility. It's a place at the center of a years-long sexual abuse investigation. At least 8 employees, including a former warden and chaplain, have been charged with sexually abusing inmates. 5 have pleaded guilty and 2 were convicted at trial.
He's very nasty with all the girls. He liked to see us naked in the showers.
This woman served 25 months at the Dublin Center. She asked us not to show her face or reveal her name, but she says what happened inside those walls was horrifying.
The officers there that insulting us, they basically see us in the showers. They open the curtains.
The Bureau of Prisons would not say where they are transferring the inmates due to safety and security reasons. However, they are most likely transferring them to places far away from here.
The closest federal women's prison is nearly 400 miles away, down in Victorville. Another former inmate says the transferring process can be brutal.
They put those women in shackles on their wrists, on their ankles, put them in buses for days and days to try to transfer them across the country, sometimes months.
Emily Shapiro with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners says the closure is concerning. A federal judge recently decided a special master will oversee operations in Dublin. Now the center is closing. Shapiro says the inmates will go to locations that won't have a special master.
This kind of abrupt closure really feels like a total evasion of accountability to survivors, incarcerated people, and advocates.
She is calling on the federal government to investigate the entire Bureau of Prisons. In Dublin, Ryan Curry, ABC 7 News.
Incredible, everybody. And I would actually like to give, Will, if you could cue up that TikTok for me, please, because I found the video of a woman who apparently has been posting about the conditions inside of Dublin Federal Prison for some time. She was incarcerated there. She is not there any longer. But she kind of gives us some more details and a little bit more context about what the closing of this prison means, particularly for women. Again, you heard in the piece there, the nearest women's prison is hundreds of miles away. All these women, it's 600 incarcerated people at Dublin prison now. All 600 of them are not getting sent to the next nearest women's prison. They're going to be sent all over the fucking country. And what does that mean for their families, people that are trying to come see them, come visit them? It means they're not going to be able to. And ultimately, why? I'll let the why be explained by this radical white sister who's about to start dropping some kernels on us. But she's going to tell you why all these women are further being made to suffer because of the actions of the correctional officers there at Dublin. Let's take a look.
Where I served 2 years of a 5-year sentence, were so incapable of stopping to SA the women in their custody that the entire prison is closing. So far, 8 employees of the Bureau of Prisons, including the warden, the chaplain, and 6 COs, have been indicted, and yet I know that there are even more. The Lieutenant Putnam, who threatened to send me to the hole for publicly talking about the conditions within the prison, called me a year ago because he watched one of my TikToks and was now tasked with doing internal investigations. The same people who participated in the cover-up of what they called Grape Club for years were then tasked with investigating themselves. The former director of the Oregon Department of Corrections, Colette Peters, took over the Bureau of Prisons under the Biden administration. The culture is so rotten to the core. When you talk to women who did time there in the 90s, they say that nothing has changed, to the fact that they are actually closing this prison. And the problem is there are very few women's prisons. So now these West Coasters and Mexican women from Tijuana and Mexicali are going to be sent thousands of miles from home and never be able to get a visit because they can't stop raping people.
What do you even say to that? Like, what do you even say to anybody that can look at anyone with critical thinking skills, with the ability to understand and process information, and you say to them that this is the best system that we have? Like, hey, we have to do it. Well, you did the crime, you got to do the time. We're going to send you in jail. Or whatever happens to you in jail, well, I guess you deserve it. Shut the fuck up, you evil, spiteful, horrible person. Okay. People deserve to be treated as humans whilst incarcerated. And to be clear, the dehumanization of these women by I have to imagine all of these CEOs had to be men. I would imagine that if any of those that have been not implemented, what's the word I'm trying to say? I'm not even trying to say indicted, that have been implicated. There we go. Any of the people, I think if any of the people have been implicated in this abuse scandal were women, I think we would hear about that. You know what I'm saying? Because they would have said it was Becky's idea. Oh, this was all Becky's idea. Becky said it was fine. So I think if there had been a Becky in this rape club scandal at the Dublin prison, I think we would have heard that. And again, this kind of goes back to the question that we have to ask ourselves, that I have asked on this show, guys. What kind of problems do we have in America? Do we have gun problems? Do we have a violence problem? Do we have a man problem? Do we have a problem? When there is concentrated power held exclusively by men, and they have the ability to wield it and weaponize it against people they perceive as being weaker than them, they will do it every time and without shame, and will cover for each other. The only reason we know about the systemic sexual abuse that is taking place at this women's prison is because the media got involved. And how did the media, the Associated Press, let me credit them properly, the Associated Press is who did the investigative journalism to uncover this. But how did the Associated Press even get hip to this story? It took whistleblowers from the inside, women who had been incarcerated there, some women who are still incarcerated. In fact, there is a whistleblower lawsuit. They have filed, there's a lawsuit pending right now against the Bureau of Prisons. And in the piece from the Associated Press, one of the lawyers representing it, this, I believe this is a class action lawsuit, because I believe there are several plaintiffs suing the Bureau of Prisons and suing some of these people who have been charged, suing them individually. But what the lawyer said in the Associated Press piece is that they are glad that instead of suing FCI Dublin, right, they sued the agency, the Bureau of Prisons, right? Because now the prison is being closed, right? So imagine if they had filed their lawsuit against FCI Dublin specifically and be like, see, well, we closed the prison and we fired the wrongdoer, so I guess y'all ain't got no lawsuit. Nope. These people are a little smarter than that. They filed suit against the Bureau of Prisons because they allege, and likely are correct, that these kinds of conditions, this is what is typical of all women's federal institutions, and probably not just at the federal level. There is something about exerting and using power, especially sexual power, right? There's something to that I suppose on some level most women may not experience, or maybe not even care to experience. Like, I don't want to ever, like, why would I ever want to try to hop on some man who's not consenting? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, does that even sound like fun? Like, does that even sound like some shit? Like you can even get moist too? Like, what? So it's weird for me, and troubling and disturbing and infuriating when I hear about the rape club at the prison, because the mandem knew that they could take advantage of these women who were vulnerable in their care. And just for clarity's purposes, because I know some people actually may not know this, but there are no circumstances legally in which an incarcerated person can consent to sex with a correctional officer or any sort of authority figure over them in that jail, because they have no power. They can't consent. Even if they say yes, it's not consent, because the power dynamic is disproportionate, right? So there is no, oh, these girls was probably trading sex for favors. They was probably getting extra jello and everything for fucking and sucking. It's like, no, no, and no. Even if that was the case, legally, it's not the case. And most importantly, these correctional officers, the warden and the chaplain, absolutely knew better. And they took advantage of the situation anyway and violated these women in numbers that we may not even fully ever know. So I want us to try to remember, we do somewhat on this program and even on Black Power Media. Obviously, we try to keep the plight of political prisoners in the fore of our conversations. But for incarcerated people overall, we have to remember that there are absolutely the special hells that these people find themselves in, right? women, men, trans folks, every experience behind the wall is a hellish one, right? And the inconsistencies and the errors of our criminal and justice system are such that it would be foolish for all of us or any of us to assume that just because somebody is in jail, that number one, they deserve to be there or they should be there, right? And even if they are there, I don't think that people deserve to be violated. Least of all, not violated by the people that are tasked with their care and their safety, right? Not to say that they're there to be nurtured or cared for in any way, but they are there to be treated as humans, and they shouldn't have their autonomy violated routinely and systematically. And in the case of FCI Dublin, we don't know for what duration of time the women inmates have experienced this. But closing the prison does not solve the problem. And in fact, it makes the challenges for these incarcerated women that much more difficult. They are now going to be further separated, even farther away from their families. And all because the correctional officers just could not stop raping them. Incredible. Anyway.